Hi everyone, delonewolf here, and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. And last week we finally got some news as to what's happening with the development of EVE Online. CCP did a live stream and came out with a dev blog explaining some of the changes that they are planning for the game before FanFest. So I personally was not expecting this to drop, maybe just a couple of small things like compression and maybe a little bit of a battleship rework, but CCP did commit to quite a bit more, including graphical updates, including an extra layer to the new player experience, focusing on mining and industry. Definitely something worth taking a look at. The compression stuff, actually they went into detail, and I really like what they're planning to do. If it works as expected or as described, of course, it basically becomes like something that's activated within the Orca, Rorcal, or the Purpose now, and as a result, anyone within range that's within the fleet will all of a sudden be able to right-click compress within their ore hold. That sounds absolutely amazing, and exactly what the players would have expected for a sort of a mobile compression capability. So sounds pretty promising, and a lot of that should be up on CC, so if you want to take a look at that yourself, you can definitely go take a look on the test server. I myself am hoping to find some time. Not really sure if that's going to work out, as actually at the moment in real life I have to give trainings, so it is pretty busy and stressful. But overall, really nice, and I'm looking forward to a lot of that. Also, especially those battleship buffs. I mean, I love the Rattlesnake, I love the Praxis, and they should see a very big tanking buffs from the changes that are promised there. So overall, we have something to look forward to. And then at FanFest, I think CCP Burger kind of mentioned that as well. They still have quite a little bit of powder that they're keeping dry for FanFest as well. And normally we'll get dev blogs and information a little bit before that first week of May, excuse me, when FanFest will actually take place. So yeah, couple of months with quite a bit of stuff on the horizon for EVE Online. We'll take a quick look at the New Eden store as well, see if anything's happening here. Eros Blossom skin still front and center as long as the Guardians Gala is happening. And on the services front, we don't have anything here. I think that's all too special so these are bundle discounts. Yeah, we don't have anything special to report on the New Eden store itself. There might be sales happening on the website, but I don't really think we should be covering those here, as we can jump into the market quickly. And plex and stuff coming in at 3 minutes. Like that. Alright, well, let's get started with plex, and I would say looks to me like plex is moving a little bit after that announcement and is starting to go back up from that 275 average here. We clearly have a little bit of a trend break with an upwards movement, which brings the sellers of plex to almost 3 million ISK in JITA, 2.8 million for the buyers, so I think they're feeling a little bit of pressure there as well. And then for the sellers in Tranquility Trading Tower, just competing with JITA at the moment, so the cheapest sell price is actually in JITA 4.4, and the buyers, same story, just above 2.8 million. So perhaps it's the announcements that have made some people more excited and expected people to return, new players to stick around for the game. But overall here, a little bit of upwards pressure. Let's see if it's also translating in the multiple pilot train certificate. No, not yet, still not moving. And very interestingly, I think it still basically has to recover from that big sale that happened. You see the massive volumes here crashing the price down to 1.2 billion, and we're still stuck there. I think the volumes still need to be absorbed by the market. Almost 1.3 billion for the sellers and almost 1.2 billion for the buyers. Skill Extractor should see a similar move, and there it is, actually a little bit more of a one-day shift in the price of Skill Extractors, up on these averages by quite a little bit, from around 330 million on the chart to 340 for the sellers, 329, so practically 330. The average price for let's say a week ago is now the buy price for the Skill Extractor, so that upwards pressure is clearly showing up here as well. Impact on the injectors with all of this stuff. All right, well, basically still slightly down for the large scale injectors. We're not going below 630 million, although on a couple of days the average prices can actually crash to such lows, despite the fact that over 2,500 of them are being traded a day on average. 650 million for the sellers and 614 to 610 for the buyers. This is definitely a shift in this market that in my opinion is still showing hesitation. We've got a really pretty big margin between sellers and buyers that has opened up here in the large scale injector market, and I think with this announcement that this could actually help continue this, because there will be players that are looking into compression and perhaps into some more skill injecting that is needed in order to get those optimized mining fleets going. The Rorqual is also going to be able to basically teleport or transport. I'm not really sure what the EVE term for that is right now, but you can basically jump with a number of fleet members, or you'll be able to jump with a number of fleet members to your mining site. I think CCP is looking into all the potential problems with that in order to make it do what it's intended to do, if players do love to break everything. But yeah, perhaps there will be some real uses for the Rorqual, maybe even as an exit strategy, who knows. It's definitely pretty interesting, and as a result there are players I think that are betting on there's gonna be a need for a lot of skill points, and there's other players that are saying I don't see anything on the horizon, so we're just gonna try to buy this stuff on the cheap. Definitely a lot of pressure. Then we've got the small scale injectors that are also seeing that pressure, not to the same low point as about a month ago, 135 million probably on the chart, but actually look at that, sellers coming in at 130 million, 133 in JITA, and 126 million for the first buyers, going down to 122 pretty quickly, so definitely still doing its own thing, which is a little bit of a surprise. But the small scale injectors have a much more narrow margin, are also seeing that pressure, but could stop far more quickly, while I do think for the large scale injectors that with buyers coming in at 610, basically that's somewhere down here on the chart, we do still have room for those average prices to go down. Next up, we've got the daily alpha injectors. Staying below 45 million, I think, is an okay place for CCP for these daily alpha injectors. It's still doable. It's a manageable amount on a daily basis for these daily alpha players. Practically 45 million for the sellers, 41 million for the buyers. And I think hopefully that new player experience can help to keep retention higher than what it is now. So something that the game does need, and I do think that a lot of people that try EVE Online at this point basically just try as an alpha player, as a free-to-play player. This is really a hurdle I do think that the model brings with it, right? You can get a lot of people to try your game, so hurdle number one is to have those people stick around, have enough fun into the game to decide, all right, we're actually going to keep playing the game, and I think a hook like a daily alpha injector is very good for that. But I think the hurdle after that will be to convert those people into subscribers, which is a whole other story, I think. But we will see. CCP is clearly still tackling that first one, getting the many players that try EVE Online to stick around. Then finally, we've got the hypercores that have started to stop their descent as well and are starting to move up. So maybe a little bit of inflationary expectation starting to come back into the market. We're back at almost 300,000 discs for the sellers, 290 for the buyers, and there's not a lot of sellers here. So it does look to me like the Hypernet Relay might just be losing a little bit of popularity, despite the fact that prices are going up for the hypercores. So that might actually be a move together with the plex increase here. Next up, we've got the mineral market coming in at 915. There we go. As always, we start with titanium. You may have seen it from the ticker, but we're still seeing a little bit of pressure. I would say the good news is that that 5-day moving average seems to be landing on 4.5 ISK. Hopefully it doesn't break that. We are talking a 462 now for the sellers and still a 460, 459 for the first few buyers. The margin is completely gone, and as a result you're still really able to sell your titanium above 4.5 ISK, which is good news. news, but the question is, what will dry up first? Will we get some purchasing that comes in perhaps to build more battleships, to build more capital ships, now that CCP has also announced that part of the HP or resistance nerf will be pulled back about by 50%, that might just increase demand enough to see those sell prices go up towards maybe a 475, or will these 400 million units of titanium get filled by quite a bit of supply, and then of course we could be on another leg down back to that below 4.5 ISK average price. Definitely a tricky spot for titanium to be in, but I think overall we should be very happy that we're still above 4.5 for both sellers and buyers. Pyrite was stopping the bleeding last week and has started to move sideways above 12.5 ISK, so 13.25 pretty much for the sellers and 13.16 for the buyers. Sort of the same story here as well, a little bit of margin that has completely closed down. This seller here, probably the same person that just put 500 million, maybe even 700 million units on the market in a single go, is completely closing that gap, but buyers are apparently staying high enough in price, as we also have 100 million units being bought well above 13 ISK. What will give way first? That is the real question. Then we've got Mexalon that was actually doing well and is still trying to stay or head towards 75 ISK on average, 74 for the sellers and 70 ISK pretty much for the seller. Buyers, they are just below 70 though, so that could be a psychological barrier where they're maybe trying to start to pull the price back down, but the volumes here, right, 5 million, still less than 10 million, we get one seller of 30 million ISK. All of that does feel like there's a far better balance here between sellers and buyers, especially if you look at these buy orders as well in the Mexalon market, able to command these higher prices, that price of 70 to 75 pretty easily. Then we get Isogen that last week made a break for it, pushed through that 125 and went straight to 175, where for now we are basically sitting 175 for the sellers, 165 for the buyers. I do like the fact that they are basically really forced up, right? Because who is going to actively sell Isogen to these buyers at the moment when you can see those new sell orders being just a couple 100,000 units, maybe 1.4 million here. That's what's really actively being brought to the market. Everything else tends to be bigger sell orders that are plunked down there and will sit there, will create a ceiling for the market, but buyers do have to push up against that ceiling constantly if they want to get that low sec sourced mineral. So it's only like 50 million, 60 million units until we get towards the 180, where a couple 100 million units are waiting, and then of course at 200 plus we are starting to see here a 640 million units at 225 that's in the wait as well. But perhaps we could still, especially on a little bit more capital ship usage, we could see enough demand to push through these old reserves here as well and start to bump into that 225. Who knows? I think it's entirely possible. It is still very difficult to predict, as Isogen at this point has regained its status of being far more expensive than Mexalon, which is of course in all likeliness one metric that CCP will be looking at that has reverted to a more normal state, especially now that Isogen is coming from low sec. And then we have to keep the Noxium market in mind as well, as we will eventually of course start to see a more healthy market with ups and downs depending on active demand supply, which is exactly what's happening in Noxium at the moment. That has found its range well above 1250, which is pretty damn expensive, but again, Isogen is far more ubiquitous, I think, in number when it comes to the cubic meters that you need to mine in order to get, let's say, 1,000 Isogen. It's completely different from Noxium, so there should be this correlation where eventually, right, maybe a 220 or maybe even 200 ISK Isogen price is actually normal, considering the effort that you're needing in order to get Noxium to the market as well, which is at the moment selling for 1400 ISK, 1344 for the buyer, so really narrow margin as well. Again, those buyers are forced to push up against those sell prices in order to try and get any Noxium that falls off the patient's wagon here. But you can see that big difference in the volumes, right? We get a couple people that managed to scrape together 9 million or a couple million units, but everything else is tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of units, and that is it. We don't have like a billion units in total waiting in 5-6 sell orders that are basically supporting this price. No, if LowSec gets completely burned down or blockaded, or enough miners are being destroyed in a given week, you're gonna see higher prices. If on the other hand it becomes that lucrative to mine for Noxium, you're gonna get more players that are willing to risk it for the biscuit, and then you'll see more supply that will bring the prices down. At the moment, Isogen is still suffering from, we're bumping into massive volumes at 125. We broke through that. Now we're bumping into the big volumes at 175. It's 50 million units. I think we're gonna start to chew through that pretty quickly, but we just saw that we still have like probably a billion units in the wait at several more steps as well, which is gonna keep us from getting that nice regular flow that we are starting to see here in Noxium. On the Zydrine front, continuing to pull away from that 1000 ISK barrier, so 970 now for the sellers to 946 for the buyers. Also a narrow margin, which is quite normal for a mineral that needs to be imported, but the difference in my opinion is that is coming from nullsec, is coming from far more organized groups that can defend their space and create a relatively safe place for them to mine. So at the moment I think Zydrine and Megasite as well for a big part are being influenced by what CCP is doing, how mining is changing. I think they're basically at this point absorbing the changes, they're finding the fleet comps, they're organizing their fleets, and I think compression should definitely not add pressure to this. It should basically mean that moving Zydrine is going to be easier because compression is going to be on the field and far more accessible. So Megasite is doing a little bit of its own thing, still above 700 ISK, so that one definitely jumped up a little bit late. 720 for the sellers, 703 for the buyers. At least in the last couple of weeks or so, we can see that there has also been a little bit of pressure, but it is from a one-year high point. So Megasite still, I would say, influenced by other factors than just the nullsec supply and the stability that that brings with it. And finally, we still have Morphite, of course, tied to the Tech 2 economy, and that is a very, very big change, of course, where Morphite managed to get a high point of 130,000 ISK for a single piece of mineral. That is, of course, super expensive. You can see the whole summer bubble here when we were above 75k. Then CCP, I think at this point here, said we're gonna like double the availability. That crashed the price back down, but I think at this point you've got even more availability in the December patch, double again, which of course meant that players were going to focus on grabbing as much Morphite as they could as quickly as possible. But I think even now they're making more and more gains in efficiency for their mining setups, which is continuing to bring in more supplies and which is bringing us to a price well below 50,000, 46,000 for the sellers and 44,000 for the buyers. I think entirely what CCP intends, and you can clearly see as well here since December how the volumes have been steadily rising on average, which means that more Morphite is being converted into usable materials into the game, and that is bringing the prices down. So this is more supply that is driving the price of Morphite down. Good news, I think, for those that are doing Tech 2 industry, although that's also in a weird spot. Let's move on to PI first at 1840. There we go. I think last week we saw that at least a bit of a floor and some extra demand was starting to come in, and that I think is indeed being crashed down, now that I think about it, by the announcements and by the live stream about potential changes, because I do think that CCP basically said PI is still a bottleneck. So they're seeing PI as a bottleneck, while from the perspective of someone that's actually doing PI from the planet, like raw resources up to a certain point, everything's already quite ubiquitous. We have been in really relatively low prices for many years, but let's not forget one thing. This is entirely still in line with CCP's philosophy that they announced when they went with the resource crunch, and that is that they want activity in the game to be rewarded. Passivity should not be rewarded, and well, PI is still a very passive part of the resource change in EVE Online. And as a result, I think here we had some opportunistic buying at really low prices for broadcast nodes, expecting that perhaps CCP would change other stuff to, for instance, the capital ship production that would make it possible for demand for broadcast nodes to increase. I think those hopes have basically been dashed. If there's gonna be rebalancing, changing of those blueprints, which I think CCP did announce. They want, for instance, to, I think, make dreads cheaper. Then I do think that PI will pretty much always be part of that change, and so at most we can expect the same balance as now, maybe even worse as now, as CCP said. Well, to us, PI is the bottleneck, and so PI is what's probably going to get nerfed first. So broadcast nodes back down, 1.2 million for the sellers and 1.1 million for the buyers, back at the lowest trade range for a year. Consumer construction blocks, all right. Interestingly enough, that one is actually shooting up above 8K, highest price for 8-9 months or something like that. 8,500 for most sellers, 7,800 for most buyers. Interesting thing to see all of a sudden. Very good news for this refined PI material that is actually going up in price quite a little bit. I think I've got some construction blocks lying around, by the way, that I bought on the cheap. So I think some of my investment in PI is actually going to start to pay off at this point, but it is definitely a surprise. We'll see how long this higher price can last. Then we've got consumer electronics that, well, to my surprise, are staying above 7,000 disc, which is still not a great price, but it is staying above 7,000 disc for a couple of weeks at this point. 7,600 going up to 8,000 pretty quickly. 7,000 for the first buyer as well. They are being forced up. This is interesting. I do wonder if there's maybe a bit of a shift in production itself as well. For instance, from construction blocks and consumer electronics to coolants that have been at 11, 10K plus prices for quite a bit, for basically also a refined PI material. And coolants are very easy to make, gas planets are everywhere, so maybe there is a bit of a shift happening that way. Coolants still selling for mostly 11,250, buyers coming in at 10,200. Even historically speaking, this is actually a good and normal price for coolants, even a very good price, I would say. Cryoprotectant solutions next, yeah, going back up to 120. Perhaps Guardians Gala, let me know in the comments. I was planning to maybe do a little bit of that this weekend. Hopefully, again, I find some time. But let me know in the comments if maybe some implant stuff is part of the drop pool. That would definitely explain this pool back up here for cryoprotectant solutions. 114 for the sellers and still well above 100,000 for the buyers. So the buy opportunities are far gone here in cryoprotectant solutions, but your sell opportunity is basically back. Enriched uranium next, also up. Yeah, that's a little bit of surprise that the refined PI materials are actually going up in price here. Let's see where we're at for the sellers. 10,450, almost 10,500, 9,500 for the buyers. Historically, I think still not a great price, but starting to be a little bit more normal, and the margin of 1,000 to me also feels kind of normal for a sell price at 10,000 discs. So I'm seeing a strong revalorization for these fuel-related PI materials that are perhaps starting to, push up these other refined PI materials as well. Next, we've got integrity response drones that basically started to climb out of the hole, went to from 1.5 to 1.75 million, 1.8 million for the sellers, but buyers are still below 1.5 million. So basically we opened up a little bit of margin, and I think we'll start to slowly move down now on the live stream news. Mechanical parts going back above 8,000 ISK, 8.4 for the sellers, 7.8 for the buyers, and availability is clearly not that great. Then we've got our nanites that's able to at least get a slightly better average price for the last month or so, above 5k. It's terrible, right? 5,000 ISK for a refined PM material when coolants are selling at 10, 11,000. It's terrible, but it's on this 1 year chart, it's better than what we've seen in the last 6 months. 5.4 for the sellers, 5,000 ISK for the buyers. Nano factories, so seeing a bit of pressure at the tail end here for sure. Sellers coming in at less than 1 million, buyers at 800,000. It is a little bit of margin though that has opened up. I kind of wonder if there's like less PI production in general that could be driving stuff up as well. People that are saying it's just not worth my time anymore. Organic mortar applicators, so there is that bit of pressure as well. 5-day moving average crossing just a couple days ago. That 20-day moving average, so that upswing is going to again go back down. Less than 700,000 for the sellers, and very narrow margin here though for the buyers, 670,000. Recursive computing module, just a couple more months guys and we get an easier to read chart. Made its way back to 1 million. And then the live stream hit and is already on its way back down. Sellers still at almost 1.1 million, buyers at 925. I think basically those buyers are gone from the market. It'll take a little bit of time for supply to fill that in, but it's pretty much, in my opinion, the likely move here that is down. Robotics back down below 70k, but that's also again the 1 year high point price, so a little bit of supply coming online here makes sense. 69,000 for the sellers, 66 for the buyers. That's actually a really narrow margin, showing that the upside, in my opinion, has more potential. Self-harmonizing power cores was already going back down well below 1.5 million, so yeah, 1.4 for the sellers, less than 1.3 for the buyers. Get a bit of margin opening up here. Sterile conduits not able to get back towards 1 million, 920 for the sellers, 850 for the buyers. Our Ucomi superconductors are back under pressure, 71,000 to 66,000, so that's definitely a little bit more supply compared to demand. Demand is not being there. And then wetware mainframes are down as well, below 1.5 million and below 1.4 million for the buyer. So interestingly enough, I think we are starting to see a little bit of a turnaround in some of these, like here in the construction blocks. And although supplies are still plentiful, I think it is because supply is starting to switch from these to more lucrative PI materials, and maybe in general there's a bit less production that is giving a little bit more breathing room to the entire market. But the speculative bit is constantly that demand just completely evaporates, and that is creating big gaps between sellers and buyers, like here from 1.8 million to 1.4 million. That's a very big gap between suppliers and buyers. That is constantly a threat that's looming over this entire market. And so any bad CCP news, like we're gonna, if we're gonna rebalance large ship production, it's gonna be PI related. Yeah, that's never good news for the prices, of course. Next, we've got advanced moon materials, 2740. There we go. And we saw last week basically a crash in all carbides, and it is still continuing. Here is crystalline carbonite down to the 125 range, 1 year low point, 126 for the sellers and 118 for the buyers. Let's see if it's really translating. I think the MR one was lagging behind a little bit, but here is titanium carbide trying to form a bottom, bumping up just a little bit from the 125, 145 to 134 for the sellers, but again pretty much at a 1 year low point. Then we've got Fernite Carbide for Minmatar, that's also starting to stop its descent at the 125 range, 131 to 127. And finally Tungsten Carbide for Amar, that had a little bit of catching up to do, but is also landing on the 125 price range, 137 to 127. I would say if you want to jump in on a 1 year low point, right, then I would choose the Galente one, because that one is like really still a sharp drop off at the tail end. You're now trying to buy below 120. I think on this chart that would make a lot of sense, even though all of them are potentially in investment territory. But let's keep in mind, of course, that we are in a very stable nullsec system. Moon mining compression is coming. And overall, I think this is just part of the new situation where supplies are very, very plentiful. And as a result, these low prices could be here for a while. Let's take a look at the metamaterials next. Here are the photonic metamaterials. At least that one is bouncing off of that below 10,000 ISK buy opportunity. So I think some traders spotted it and already sprung into action. Almost 11,000 for the sellers and well above 10,000 for the buyers. So your buy opportunity here is already over. I guess the market is looking at this one with a little bit more focus, because it has been so stable over the last year. So this is clearly a breakout on this entire 1 year segment that's quite noticeable. Then we've got the metamaterials for Caldari, which is non-linear, right? Same story here, went below 17.5k, 1 year low point, and then at least a little bit of buying brought the price back up away from that 18,250 for the sellers, 17,300 for the buyers. For Minmatar, we've got plasmonic metamaterials, again, yeah, went below 15k, but we are moving our average prices well above that range again, 16,000, almost 15.8 to 14.6 for the buyers. Yeah, demand still not very strong. And then terahertz metamaterials for Minmatar, still not at a 1 year low point, so still slowly ebbing down, although that's also starting to slow down there. So a little bit of probably bottom formation happening in both the carbides and in the metamaterials. Are these real buy opportunities? Well, I would say again, for maybe the longer term, a nullsec war or something like that, they could be. But at the moment, we are probably in an oversupply situation that's quite structural. We still have our other non-linear moon materials. I don't expect any good news. For instance, here, yeah, fermionic condensates, despite high volumes, super flat above 60k, 61,000 for the sellers, 60,000 for the buyers. So that's, you know, not going anywhere. Question is, where will it break? My expectation to the downside. Then we've got ferrogel that just broke to the downside, now back below 30,000 ISK, pretty much a 1 year low point. There's really not much to say on this chart. Fullerite still below 700 ISK, so it's trying to crawl its way back a little bit, 703 for the sellers, but a 655 for the buyers. That's still a pretty big margin, and so those average prices are still suffering quite badly. Hypersynaptic fibers, there we go, forming a bottom at pretty much a 1 year low point again. Nanotransistors, very flat, but just, you know, just above 4k, so not able to go anywhere. And first seller coming in below 4k here as well, putting pressure on the market to go to an even lower price range. That's not good news, but it is entirely expected, of course, as we've got basically that oversupply situation showing through the entire advanced moon materials market. Phenolic composites basically bottoming out here as well. Pressurized oxidizers, one of those new materials, not very good to show a good chart on this one just yet, but yeah, heading back down to a price below 10k. I think it could do so in the upcoming week or so. Reinforced carbon fiber, then you can see a little bit of pressure on that one as well. And then we get our ceramic fibers that just completely broke down as well, below 300 ISK, 1 year low point. 298 for the sellers, they're so aggressive, and 281 for the buyers. They just broke through that 300 like it's nothing, and they're still competing with one another despite these low prices. So perhaps if you have a long enough horizon, some careful buying here does make sense, I think, because you are stocking up, of course, on pretty much 1 year low points for a lot of these advanced moon materials. Let's see what this means for Tech2 ships, coming in at 33.10. There we go. As always, we start with the Basilisk that is going back down, but is just below 200 million. So a buy opportunity, probably not yet. 197 for the sellers, 189 almost for the buyers. Too narrow a margin in that no man's land between highs and lows. So this is hopefully this has enough momentum that we create another buy opportunity, but not the place we want to make moves. Cerberus, that's interesting. Look at these daily averages touching 200 million. Those buyers should be well below that. Yep, 200 million for the sellers, 180 for the buyers. Look at that difference between sellers and buyers. The Cerberus is absolutely in a buy opportunity. You're buying close to 180. Be careful, be patient, but right now, in all likeliness, with this pressure that is happening at the moment, you are able to get one of those buy orders to trigger. And that, of course, I think is a very good purchase on this full 1 year chart. This feels like bargain time for the Cerberus. I will again give you guys that warning though, especially considering how the advanced movements are basically cratering across the board. I would say you're buying very cheaply for that longer horizon as well, right? A nullsec explosion with a couple Cerberus fleets that are being destroyed is what you're hoping for, to get like maybe a 300 million to almost double your money or something like that. But don't expect to have a sell opportunity next week or just in a couple of weeks. Next up, we've got the Guardian seeing pressure yet again as well. 170 and below is our previous bottom though. 183 to 175. So, you know, it's definitely already under pressure and decently low. If you absolutely want to, I think you can jump in, but know that just a couple months ago, you had even better buy opportunities. Then we've got the Hound that's also seeing that pressure, but is unfortunately just past the buy opportunity, right? Like let's say a week ago, right at the peak of that downward trend, that's when you've got your best opportunity to trigger one of those buy orders. Now we're at 24 million to 23 million. You see, yep, that's exactly what I was talking about, those buyers, right? That probably went towards that 20 million. Then went in 21 and 22.5, and then that competition just pushes those average prices back up. And yeah, it's at this point that you have the chance to still grab one at 21 million, but that's over already. I hope it doesn't come through too much, but the neighbors have started vacuuming right next to me. But let's keep going. Here is the Ichthyorsa going down in price as well. Our buyers well below 600 million. No, not yet. 614, 615, actually 616 million for the first seller. 601 for the buyer. That's actually a really, really narrow margin between sellers and buyers. But for this Ichthyorsa chart, buying below 600 million would be definitely a possibility eventually, and something that you could consider as one of those bargain hunting prizes. The Ishtar is continuing to go down, and this is that warning that I should also try to give you guys, is that don't all of a sudden put all your ISK in a single buy opportunity, because you never know when we're going even lower. You can see here on a couple of occasions the chart touched 190, and an investor said, all right, 1 year low point, let's jump in, let's buy. They managed to push the price back up to 210, but now we're going even lower. Sellers of Ishtars are desperate at 188 million, and buyers are very happy to try to grab an Ishtar well below 180 at 177.54. So in all likeliness, right now on this momentum, you're able to easily buy an Ishtar below 180 million, which is far, far below the entire chart. Then we get the Manticore, our first reverse, first one that doesn't see too much pressure here, actually slowly heading back to 30 million, 27 for the sellers and 27 for the buyers. So zero margin on this upside move here for the price of the Manticore. What's still unfortunate is, of course, that we're probably already peaking here and that we're not making another high. So the volatility waves are still not building. Then we've got the Munin, in between spot, right around 200 million, 206 to 197. So that's another no man's land that I wouldn't want to buy. Buy below 180, sell at 230. That's perhaps your possibility at the moment. So yeah, we're definitely not there. Nemesis, same story. So Galente apparently starting to fall out of favor, but I would call this another buy opportunity. Sellers coming in at 21 million, a little bit above that, and buyers well below 20 million. I mean, compared to all these other stealth bombers, buying a Nemesis below 20 million seems like a pretty decent deal. Next we've got the Oneros, that, yeah, no man's land unfortunately. So we don't see higher highs that slowly make their way to 200 or anything like that. Nope. Now it's 176 to 166. So be careful on this one. I would honestly wait for an even lower low before I would jump in on this. The Panther kinda, I think here confirming that we're in a low construction cost period. Despite higher volumes, prices are not managing to really break back towards 1.2 billion. It's still 1.15 billion for the sellers and buyers just above a billion. Then we've got the Purifier. Let's see what that chart is doing. Yeah, not really wanting to go towards 20 million either. 24 to 23 million. That's definitely too narrow a margin to jump in or to try to sell, in my opinion. And you can see how aggressive buyers are though here. So that's the big difference, and that does to me indicate that, yeah, the Nemesis, you can try to buy one of those at the moment. Then we got the Scimitar that, you know, was one of those hopeful waves, made its way back to 210, buying at the low point. You probably easily bought Scimitars below 180, so that was a decent trade. We've got some momentum on the downside, but let's see where those buyers are. 188 to 178, so in all likeliness, if you didn't ride this first wave, you can risk your Scimitar, try to buy one below 180. I think it is possible, especially on this momentum, for this pressure on the price to grab one, but know that another 210 is not guaranteed. If you look at the other markets, it's very rare that we make another high that's higher than a previous spike for even the last 6 months or so. And then the widow sort of confirming, you know, that we're in a cheaper period of time. Less than 1.1 billion for the sellers, less than a billion for the buyers. And then finally we've got the Zealot that's also going back down towards a 1-year low point, 174 to less than 170 for the buyers. Yeah, let's see, that's below here on the chart. Buying one, but not too many. For the Zealot, for the Ishtar, for the Nemesis, all of those to me make a lot of sense. We're definitely looking at pretty cheap prices, but again, don't expect that turnover to be next week. Next up, the Tech 3 ship market, 41 minutes. There we go. As always, we'll start with the destroyer. So here is the Confessor that is finally going down. At least that's normal after going to 65 million and above 60 million for the 5-day moving average. That's actually pretty damn impressive. We are going back down towards 50 million, 51.5 for the sellers, 49 million for the buyers. And so here in the last couple of days, we should see a decent amount of Confessors that will finally help stabilize things. But that should give a little bit of breathing room to at least some of the others. So let's see what the Hecate is doing. The Hecate is bouncing well up that 50 million back to 52.5, 46 million for the buyers. Supply wise, yeah, last 24 hours actually still quite a decent amount of Hecates. What does that mean for the Jackdaw? The Jackdaw is going back below 50 million isk. 49 for the sellers. Oof, that's a lot of supply that's going to keep us in check here, and buyers have dropped off to 45.6 million. So does all of that supply mean this Vapel has moved in any way? Slight move up, trying to get back above 47.5 million, 48 for the sellers and 44 million for the buyers, but it's just not enough buyers to really make anything substantial happen in this Vapel. Honestly, if I were to be looking for a trade opportunity, I would look at that massive glut of Jackdaws here that should really put a pin in the Jackdaw market itself for a while, wait for the best possible buy price, maybe 20 of them and you're down below 44 million, and then hope, of course, that eventually we'll get another spike, maybe in the Hecate, maybe in the Confessor, that will then mean a drying up of all of this supply, and that could then create a sell opportunity. So in my opinion, the most interesting part of this one is that the Jackdaw still had a couple hundred ships come in, despite being the lowest of the 3 more popular ones, and that could create a buy opportunity if we keep a close enough eye on it. For the cruisers, we've got the Legion that is continuing its slow descent, and its average price is now below 180 million, 175 for the sellers, well below 170 at 167 for the buyers. If you are looking for perhaps a Legion investment, but definitely if you want to fly one, have one ready, perhaps you're training for this, then this seems to be the right time to buy a hull. Then we've got the Loki that last week was flat, seeing a little bit of pressure, but I don't think we're gonna call it a buy opportunity. Actually, 195 now for the sellers, but buyers are dropping off here down to the 182. I think the explanation, though, we do have to be a little careful with calling this just outright a buy opportunity, is that you know, these cruisers, these strategic cruisers, when it comes to the PvE content, are quite often competing with the far slower but quite more tanky battleships, and those battleships are getting a massive edge all of a sudden with the buffs that they are getting, and so maybe strategic cruisers will become the #1 victim of all of this. But if I'm not mistaken, although that does, in my opinion, mean that we got to be very careful when we buy these hulls. But if I'm not mistaken, CCP has also mentioned, not in the last live stream, but the one before that, which was quite a while before, that what is also on their radar is the fact that basically the strategic cruisers have lost their niche gameplay, their niche capabilities, and that is something that is on their radar. So maybe trying to buy the cheapest possible hulls for the longer term again, but for a CCP intervention this time, may be the right tactic, as we're seeing prices here for the Proteus go down as well, below 180, 173 to 162, and let's see if even the Tengu has lost some of its feathers, and not that much just yet. That one is still pretty popular right here, 200 million to 188. Maybe the Tengu can like use those large shield extenders that are getting buffs, or is that like a battleship buff, a battleship bonus that's getting buffed. I'm not exactly sure how it works, but to my surprise, the Tengu is not moving down together with all the other cruisers. But yeah, this would be my philosophy around this. Honestly, I think at the moment all eyes are on the battleships. They are becoming the kings of PvE, especially in high sec, and they could really displace a lot of these strategic cruiser options. But then, of course, if you can buy cheap, and CCP does give them a very interesting new, perhaps, way that they have a role that's only for them, then of course you could be looking at a very juicy investment all of a sudden. But we don't know when, we've got no timeline, nothing is concrete, so that is a little bit of a gamble, but that is my way of looking at these declines, really massive declines, especially in the Legion here, for the average prices for these hulls. And then we've got the extra product for the week, which is a request from a couple weeks ago, I think, but someone asked me to look at Filaments, at the Abyssal Filaments, so that's coming in at, let's say, 46.30. I'm not really sure why, but I'm willing to take a look. I honestly expect these to be pretty stable, so let's look for Filaments. And let's just, so it was the Abyssal ones, so we get Dark, Electric, Exotic, Firestorm and Gamma, and then we get quite a few different, I think, categories for all of the tiers. But let's just start at the top here. Let's see what Agitated Dark Filaments are doing on the chart. That is interesting and quite unusual, but we did get a massive boost up here that pushed the price up quite a lot, and that has basically been absorbed. So these are costing 20,000 disc, not exactly the cost. So Electrical had a bit of a volume boost and a slight price move here as well. Let's just quickly go over these. Agitated are at the cheapest point they've ever been, 10,000 disc, and then Firestorm, bit of that boost as well, and Gamma pretty damn stable. Alright, let's quickly take a look at the calm ones. Calm ones are pretty calm and pretty affordable across the board, I would say, costing really next to nothing as well. 2,500 disc. Cataclysmic, that should be a little bit different, that should be higher tier. We definitely have a better price, 22.5 million, I think that's tier 5. If I look at the icon here, 16 million for the sellers, 15 million for the buyers, 22.5 as the high point. And here, right, late January, again a volume spike. It does seem to have done something. Cataclysmic Electrical going for, ooh, that's quite expensive. 41 million for the sellers, 38 for the buyers. This one is a bit more stable for the exotic one than the Firestorm one. Very cheap, 4 million all of a sudden. And then the Gamma Filament, another big boom. And then, whoa, volumes in the last couple of days, but hardly able to move the needle on the price at 9 million. We got some Chaotix. Would that also... So no, maybe that's tier 5 and that's tier 6 or something. Chaotic costing a couple of million. Definitely, you know, December, January here, we got another boom in price. Here it is as well, a little bit more. In the electrical one, a little bit calmer, but in general, these are in the millions as well, except for the Firestorm one, that's really cheap at 1.3 million. Chaotic Gamma Filament, 12 million. So honestly, I don't see this as anything that I would want to actively trade, but to keep this in mind, yeah, if you do eventually find these drops, these 5, maybe tier 5, tier 6, and you're not able to run them, know that, you know, people are willing to pay a pretty hefty price for a lot of these. Let's see if we've got some more to look at. Here are the fierce ones. Again, a big volume spike here towards February. Not sure what that's all about. Get this as well for Fierce Electrical, although a couple weeks earlier. Less than 1 million though, so these are not exactly the cost. And Fierce Gamma, not much to see here. Anything else left? We've got Raging, that's probably tier 4, 500,000, not moving too much. Raging Electrical costing, yeah, a couple million. You can see even a tier 4 can be worth 9 million for the sellers. Then we get an exotic one, Firestorm, probably not expensive. Yeah, that's super common, 300,000. And then the Gamma one, yeah, that's 10 to 12 million. That's definitely a little bit more expensive here as well. And then the Tranquil ones, that sounds like it's gonna be cheap. Yeah, those are like the newbie tiers, so those are quite affordable at just a couple tens of thousands of ISK. So yeah, quick look at the filaments. There's definitely big volume spikes that I can't really explain. Just know that those higher tier filaments are basically worth ISK, but I do think you basically have to run filaments in order to find those. So interesting suggestion. I think for next week we'll probably be looking at some battleships and see how they have responded to all of these announcements. For now, that's it for this EVE Talk. Thank you very much for watching and listening, guys, and as always, I'll see you next time.